Daniel Carter slammed his badge down on the glass table so hard it cracked the surface. Then I quit. The room stopped breathing. Victoria Reynolds, CEO, 54 years old, 20 years of boardroom wars behind her, sat completely still. Her nephew Evan, the man she had just handed Daniel's entire team to, still had his hand extended for a handshake that was never going to happen. Daniel picked up his worn canvas bag, didn't straighten his jacket, didn't look at the vice presidents, didn't look at the nephew with the Columbia MBA and the expensive watch and the expression of a man who had never once been told no. He looked directly at Victoria. "You just gave away the only thing keeping this company's best division alive." His voice was quiet. That was worse than shouting. "You'll figure that out. Just not today." Then he walked out, and the crack in that glass table stayed there for 6 months, right up until the day Victoria Reynolds finally picked up the phone and called the man she had thrown away. Drop your cities in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you've ever been the person holding everything together while someone else got the credit, subscribe to this channel and hit that bell. What happens next will hit closer to home than you expect. The morning Daniel Carter quit, he had already been awake for 4 hours. Not because he was anxious. Not because he was rehearsing what he would say. He was awake because his 10-year-old daughter Lily had a science project due, and the poster board they'd bought from the dollar store the night before kept curling at the corners no matter how many books they stacked on top of it. At 6 in the morning, Daniel was sitting at their kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio, holding down the edges of a poster board about the water cycle, while Lily carefully glued on cotton balls that were supposed to represent clouds. She had her mother's focus, that same deep, quiet concentration that meant the rest of the world had temporarily ceased to exist. "Dad," she said without looking up, "is the water cycle the reason it rains?" "That's part of it, yeah. So water goes up, becomes clouds, then comes back down?" "Exactly." She pressed another cotton ball into place. "That's kind of like your job, isn't it? You put stuff into people and then eventually it comes back." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you get that from?" "I don't know." She shrugged. "You always say you get back what you give." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at his daughter, this small, serious, impossibly perceptive kid, who noticed things that grown adults spent entire careers missing, and something settled inside him. A kind of quiet clarity. "Yeah," he said finally. "That's exactly like my job." He didn't know, sitting there at that kitchen table, that 4 hours later, he would no longer have that job. Daniel Carter was 38 years old and had been at Everstone Technologies for a decade. He did not have a business degree from a prestigious university. He did not have a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords and executive certifications. He did not have a polished corporate image or a wardrobe that announced his importance before he opened his mouth. What Daniel had was something that couldn't be printed on a resume or displayed on a wall. He understood people. Not in the vague, motivational poster way that managers like to claim at team-building retreats. Genuinely understood them. The way a man who has raised a child alone for 6 years learns to read a face before a word comes out of a mouth. The way a man who has sat at hospital bedsides and attended funerals and figured out how to explain death to a 7-year-old girl learns that human beings are fragile and complicated and need to be handled with something more than process charts and performance reviews. Daniel had started at Everstone in the warehouse, inventory, shipment tracking, loading dock logistics, jobs that most people with any ambition treated as temporary embarrassments on the way to something better. Daniel treated them as classrooms. He learned how the company moved, how decisions made in the executive suites on the 14th floor landed 3 weeks later in the hands of guys working 12-hour shifts on the ground floor. He learned where the communication broke down. He learned which managers were respected because they were feared, and which ones were respected because they actually listened. He learned the difference between those two things very early, and it never left him. Over the years, he moved through departments the way a careful man moves through a house he's still learning steadily, paying attention, never assuming he already knew the room. Quality control, project coordination, client services. By the time he reached the Innovation and Development Division, he had touched nearly every functional part of the company, and more importantly, he had remembered every person he met along the way. That memory, that genuine, personal memory, was what made Daniel Carter different from every other manager Everstone had. He didn't just remember that Jordan was an engineer who worked on the 4th floor. He remembered that Jordan had come to him 2 years ago at 10:30 at night, sitting in his car in the parking garage, voice cracking, saying he didn't think he was smart enough to be here. He remembered what he said back to Jordan that night, and he remembered watching Jordan walk into the office the next morning, with his head a little higher. He didn't just know that Maya was the lead designer. He knew that Maya had quit 2 jobs before Everstone because the micromanagement had turned her creative process into something mechanical and joyless. He knew that the 3 hours between 8 and 11 in the morning, when she came in before anyone else and worked in near silence, were sacred to her. He knew that the best thing he could do for Maya was protect those 3 hours like they were made of glass. He didn't just understand that Chris and Olivia were brilliant specialists who produced exceptional work. He understood that their personalities were fundamentally incompatible in direct collaboration, that when they were placed on the same deliverable, they stopped competing with the problem and started competing with each other. He had spent years engineering projects so that their work would intersect only at the point of completion, where the results spoke for themselves, and there was nothing left to argue about. None of this was written down anywhere. None of it appeared in any operational document or management protocol or company handbook. It lived entirely in Daniel Carter's head and in the invisible web of trust and history that he had spent 10 years carefully building between himself and 12 of the most difficult, most talented, most valuable people in the entire organization. And on a Thursday morning in March, none of it mattered to Victoria Reynolds. The call came at 9:45. Daniel was at his desk reviewing the quarterly breakdown for one of their major client accounts when his phone buzzed. Victoria's assistant. "Ms. Reynolds would like you to come up to the 14th floor at 10 o'clock. The executive conference room." He looked at the message for a moment, then set his phone down and went back to the numbers. He had been in Victoria's executive conference room before. It was never casual. The room had floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, which meant that whatever happened in there was visible, in silhouette at least, to anyone standing in the hallway. Daniel had always assumed that was intentional. Power likes to be seen performing itself. At 10 o'clock, he took the elevator to 14. When the elevator doors opened, he noticed things before he entered the room. He always noticed things first. It was automatic. The same way a man who has worked with complicated people for 10 years automatically reads a room before he walks into it. Victoria was already seated at the head of the table. She was 54, trim, silver-haired, and had the kind of composed expression that communicated authority without effort. She had built Everstone's executive structure over 20 years, and she was genuinely intelligent. Daniel had always respected that about her. She was not a stupid woman. She was, however, a woman who had a blind spot the size of a building. 2 of her senior vice presidents were seated on her right, Gerald from operations and Diane from human resources. Both of them had the careful, neutral expression that meant they already knew what was about to happen and had already decided they were not going to be the ones to say anything about it. And then there was the man Daniel didn't recognize. He was seated across from Gerald and Diane, maybe 30 years old, maybe 32. Dark suit, expensive watch, the kind of hot posture you get from years of being told you should take up more space. He had Victoria's jawline strong forward, slightly aggressive, and her eyes, though on him the intelligence in them looked newer, less tested. He was looking at Daniel with the particular expression of a man who has been told he has already won something. "Daniel," Victoria said, "thank you for coming up. Please, sit down." He sat. "I want to introduce you to someone. This is Evan Reynolds, my nephew." Daniel looked at Evan. Evan extended a hand across the table with the kind of confident grip that announces itself. Daniel shook it. "Evan has just completed his MBA at Columbia," Victoria said. "He's been working for the last 3 years with Stratford Consulting in New York, specifically in organizational leadership and team performance. He has an exceptional background, and I've been very impressed with his thinking around where companies like ours need to go in the next 5 years." Daniel kept his expression neutral. He was listening for the sentence underneath the sentence. "I've made a decision," Victoria said. "I want Evan to step in as the head of the Innovation and Development Division." There it was. Daniel didn't move. He held completely still, the way he'd learned to hold still when something big landed, not because he was suppressing emotion, but because he needed to actually hear what was being said before he responded to it. "I want to be clear," Victoria continued. that this is not a reflection of your performance. Your numbers have been outstanding. The division's results speak for themselves. But I believe this is a moment for strategic evolution, and Evan brings a fresh perspective that I think will take the team to the next level. Strategic evolution, fresh perspective, next level. Daniel had been in enough corporate rooms to know that those phrases were containers for whatever a person needed them to contain. Right now they were containers for, we are replacing you with someone I trust more. And the reason I trust him more is that he belongs to me. He asked quietly, what's my role? Victoria's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. We'd love for you to stay on as a senior advisor. Help Evan with the transition. Make sure continuity is maintained. Your institutional knowledge is incredibly valuable, Daniel, and we want to make sure that's preserved. Senior advisor, not a title, not a salary upgrade, not even a lateral move. A demotion dressed up in the language of appreciation. He would sit next to the man who replaced him and answer his questions and help him look competent. He would carry the weight without holding the title. He would do the invisible work of keeping everything together, while someone else got the credit for the results. Daniel understood with perfect clarity exactly what was being offered. He looked at Victoria, then he looked at Evan, who was watching him with the expression of a man who expects gratitude from the person he's replacing. Then Daniel looked back at Victoria. Then I quit, he said. The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear the hum of the air conditioning system 3 stories above them. Victoria blinked. It was the first involuntary thing he had ever seen her do. Daniel, I appreciate the time I've had here, he said. He was already standing up. I genuinely do, and I don't have any bad feelings about this. But I'm not going to stay in a role that asks me to do the same job I've been doing without the same authority I've needed to do it. You're being impulsive, Victoria said. Her voice had shifted, less composed now, more careful. I understand this is a surprise and I should have given you more time to process it. But I want you to think about, I'm not being impulsive, Daniel said. And he said it without any heat in it, which somehow made it more final than anger would have. I've thought about this kind of situation for a long time. I just didn't know when it would happen. He picked up his bag from the chair beside him. An old canvas work bag, worn at the handles, not the kind of thing that belonged in an executive conference room. He'd had it since Lily was 4 years old. There was a small water stain on the left side from the time she'd knocked a cup of apple juice onto it and cried for 20 minutes because she thought she'd ruined it. He carried it every day because he never wanted to forget where he actually came from. Daniel Evans spoke for the first time. His voice was smooth and practiced. I hope you know this doesn't have to be adversarial. I would genuinely value your guidance during the Mayans. I know, Daniel said. He wasn't rude about it. He just wasn't interested. Good luck to you, Evan. I mean that. He walked to the door. Daniel. Victoria's voice had gone quiet. There was something in it that wasn't quite desperation, but was moving in that direction. You've been here 10 years. He paused with his hand on the door. Didn't turn around, I know, he said. That's why I know this is the right call. He opened the door and walked out. The hallway outside the conference room ran the full length of the 14th floor. And from the Innovation and Development bullpen 3 floors below, you could see silhouettes through the glass when the overhead lights were right. Daniel knew this because he had watched silhouettes himself, had stood in that bullpen, and watched the shapes of executives making decisions that would land on his team before the day was out. He didn't look back at the conference room as he walked toward the elevator, but he became aware, in the strange peripheral way that comes from a decade of reading environments, that he was being watched. He pressed the elevator button. Behind him, through the glass walls of the bullpen on the 11th floor, his team had gathered. Not all of them. Some were in meetings, some were working heads down, but enough. Jordan was standing near the glass, not pretending to do anything else. Maya was beside him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the way that meant she was feeling too many things at once. Chris and Olivia, who almost never voluntarily stood near each other, were side by side. They had seen the shape of what happened. They didn't know the details yet, but they understood the shape. The elevator arrived. Daniel stepped in. He turned around because he always turned around. Because he was the kind of man who didn't leave without facing the room, and he looked down the hall through the glass at the 11th floor bullpen, at the silhouettes of his team. He raised one hand briefly. Then the elevator doors closed. He called Lily's school to make sure she'd gotten there okay. She had. He sat in his car in the parking structure for about 15 minutes, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. A pigeon landed on the concrete barrier near the front of his car and looked at him with the complete indifference that pigeons have toward the private crises of human beings. Daniel looked back at the pigeon. "Yeah," he said out loud. "I know." He started the car and drove home. The thing people didn't understand about the team Daniel had built, the thing that would take Victoria Reynolds 6 full months to finally begin to grasp, was that its success was not an accident of talent. Everstone's Innovation and Development Division had 12 people. All of them were exceptional at what they did. 3 of them were genuinely, uncommonly brilliant, the kind of technical minds that headhunters actively pursue and companies fight to retain. Individually, they were impressive. Together, under most management structures, they would have been a disaster. Because brilliant people are not always easy people. And difficult people, without someone who genuinely understands them, tend to eventually consume each other. Daniel had learned this the hard way in his first year leading the team. He had come in with the assumption, the reasonable, logical, completely wrong assumption that if you gave talented people clear goals and adequate resources, they would figure out how to work together. That competence would find its own alignment. What he discovered instead was a team in quiet civil war. Maya, the lead designer, was producing work at maybe 40% of her capability because her previous manager had implemented a check-in system that required her to report her creative progress every 2 hours. By the time Daniel arrived, she had adapted to the system by producing surface-level work that satisfied the check-ins and saved her real ideas for the 40 minutes before she left at the end of the day. When Daniel looked at her output during that first month and compared it to the portfolio she'd submitted when she was hired, he felt genuinely frustrated, not at her, but at the waste of it, at how easy it was, apparently, to take something exceptional and methodically make it ordinary. He dissolved the check-in system in his second week. He didn't announce it with a speech about creative freedom or employee autonomy. He just stopped scheduling the check-ins and started asking Maya, once a day, one single question: "Is there anything you need from me today?" Most days the answer was no. Some days it was a resource or a decision she needed cleared above her level. He got her what she needed and got out of her way. Her output doubled within 6 weeks. Jordan's situation was different and, in Daniel's estimation, more fragile. Jordan was a systems engineer with a mind that could hold architectural complexity, the way most people hold a shopping list. His work was frequently the structural backbone of the division's most ambitious projects. He was also, underneath the technical competence, a man who had been told too many times in too many rooms that he didn't quite belong there. Not explicitly, no one had ever handed Jordan a memo explaining that his background or his appearance or his particular brand of quiet intelligence made people underestimate him. It had happened in smaller ways. The meeting where his idea got passed over and then praised when someone else offered the same idea 20 minutes later. The performance review where his exceptional results were described as meets expectations while a colleague doing comparable work was called a standout contributor. The accumulated weight of small wrongnesses that over time can make even a brilliant person start to believe the room's low opinion of them. Daniel recognized it because he had seen it before. He had felt traces of it himself in the early years before he stopped giving rooms the authority to define him. He started including Jordan's name explicitly in executive briefings. He started saying, in the rooms that mattered, this architectural solution came from Jordan. He saw the flaw in the original approach and rebuilt the whole framework in 72 hours. He made Jordan's contributions visible in the places where visibility translated into credibility. And when Jordan called him at 10:30 at night, parked in the garage, voice unsteady, Daniel answered. He didn't put the call on speaker and half listen while he handled something else. He sat in his own kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, and he talked with Jordan until Jordan's voice came back to itself. Chris and Olivia were a different problem entirely, and the most delicate one Daniel managed. They were both data scientists, both extraordinary, and their approaches to problem solving were so fundamentally opposed that every interaction between them contained the structural tension of a compressed spring. Chris was a systems thinker. He needed to understand the full architecture before he could evaluate any single component. Olivia was an iterative analyst. She believed you learned the shape of a problem by attacking its edges and working inward. Neither approach was wrong, But each of them believed the other's approach was actively harmful to good work, and they were vocal about that belief. Daniel never tried to change either of them. He didn't run team workshops on communication styles or bring in a consultant to facilitate their conflict resolution journey. He understood that their opposition was partly intellectual and partly personal, and that neither dimension was going to dissolve through conversation. Instead, he restructured the work. He designed projects so that Chris delivered foundational architecture that Olivia's team then stress-tested through iteration. Their outputs intersected, but their working processes didn't. By the time they were in the same room reviewing results, the argument had already been resolved by the data itself. There was nothing left to fight about. It was not a simple system to maintain. It required constant attention, advanced planning, and the willingness to sometimes take on extra coordination work himself to prevent them from landing on the same deliverable before it was ready for them both. It required a level of invisible labor that never appeared on any project report. But it worked. The division worked. And in the 10 years Daniel spent holding it together, the word worked became such a comfortable baseline that the people above him stopped wondering why. You quit? Jordan's voice on the phone had the particular quality of someone who has just received information that doesn't fit the shape of their known world. What do you mean you quit? As in I'm no longer an employee of Everstone Technologies, Daniel said. He was in his kitchen now, the same kitchen, where he'd held down that poster board at 6 that morning. As of about 40 minutes ago, there was a long silence. Was it the Reynolds thing? The Nephew thing? Daniel paused. Who told you about that? Diane from HR told Gerald, and Gerald's assistant was in the elevator with 2 people from your floor. Jordan's voice had something beneath the shock now, something tighter. She's putting her nephew in charge? Does she know who I mean, does she have any idea? Jordan, what you've actually been doing, because I can tell you right now, I can tell you from my own direct personal experience that whatever she thinks she's getting by. Jordan, Daniel said it firmly but without sharpness. It's done, she made her call. I made mine. Another silence. Are you okay? Jordan asked. Daniel looked out his kitchen window. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio. A neighbor's kid was riding a bike on the sidewalk. A delivery truck was backing up across the street. The world had not in fact stopped turning. Yeah, he said. I'm okay, are you sure? Because you've been there for 10 years. I've been raising Lily alone for 6 years, Daniel said. I know how to make decisions that need to be made before you're ready to make them. He paused. Take care of yourself over there. You're going to be fine. How do you know that? Jordan's voice was genuinely asking. Because I spent 4 years making sure you'd be fine, Daniel thought. Because every system I built in that division was designed to run on its own momentum. And the momentum is real, even if the man who created it is no longer there. Because I know you, Daniel said. That's why. He hung up, looked at the phone for a moment, and then set it face down on the counter. He was at the school when Lily got out at 3:15. She came out with her backpack and her finished poster, now safely transported in a cardboard sleeve she'd borrowed from the art room, because she knew, with the same matter-of-fact practicality she'd had since she was 6, that you don't trust important things to nothing. She climbed into the passenger seat and looked at him. You're not at work, she said. This was unusual on normal days. Daniel worked until 5 or 5:30 and Lily took the school bus home. No, he said. She looked at him more carefully, the way she did when she was reading something that wasn't being said. What happened? I quit my job today. Lily was quiet for a moment. She set the poster carefully on the back seat. Then she turned back to the front. Because they didn't see what you do, she asked. He looked at her. She looked back. Yeah, he said, that's exactly it. She nodded slowly, like that was an answer that made complete sense, even though it shouldn't have, even though she was 10 years old, and shouldn't have had the framework to understand what that meant. But Lily had spent 6 years watching her father do invisible things, carry invisible weight, show up for other people in ways that those other people didn't always recognize or name. She had watched him hang up the phone at 11 at night and never once complain about who was on the other end of it. She had watched him drive to the office on a Saturday because one of his people was struggling, and he wasn't, the kind of man who could know that and do nothing. She had in her own life been the same kind of person, the one who remembered everyone's feelings, the one who solved arguments before teachers noticed them, The one who made sure the kid eating alone in the cafeteria got invited to sit with someone. She did all of it quietly, without announcement, and she had recently started to feel what her father had felt for years, the particular invisibility of being someone who makes things work. "Lily," Daniel said. "Yeah?" He started the car. "What do you want for dinner?" She considered this, with the same seriousness she gave everything. "Tacos. Tacos it is." He pulled out of the school parking lot and drove toward the grocery store. The afternoon light was the particular soft gold that comes in early spring, when the days are getting longer again, and the world has not yet decided it's summer. In the back seat, Lily's science project the water cycle, cotton ball clouds, the careful small handwriting that looked like her mother's road home in its cardboard sleeve, safe and complete. Daniel drove. He didn't feel lost. He didn't feel angry. He felt, for the first time, in longer than he could remember, like a man who had simply told the truth about what he was worth. And the world had not, as it turned out, ended because of it. What he could not have known, driving home on that Tuesday in March, was what had already begun to unravel 3 floors above the parking garage, where his car used to sit every morning. The meeting Evan Reynolds held that first Friday was the longest in the division's history. The meeting the following Friday was the second longest. Maya's 3 hours were gone. Jordan's calls went to voicemail. And something that had taken 10 years to build was beginning, quietly, and then not so quietly, to come apart. The news moved through Everstone Technologies the way bad news always moves through a building, full of people who depend on each other, fast, distorted, and landing hardest on the people who least deserved the shock. By noon on that Tuesday, every person on the 11th floor knew that Daniel Carter had quit. By 2 o'clock they knew about Evan Reynolds. By 3 they knew about the badge, the cracked glass table, the 7 words Daniel had said before he walked out. Jordan heard it from Maya. Maya had heard it from someone in HR who shouldn't have been talking. She came to Jordan's desk without saying anything first, which was unusual for Maya, who always announced herself with at least a knock on the door frame. She just appeared beside him, arms crossed, and said, "He's gone." Jordan didn't look up from his screen right away. He finished the line of code he was writing, because his brain needed the completion, and then he turned his chair around and looked at her. "I know," he said. "He called me." Maya's eyes went sharp. "He called you? What did he say?" "He said it's done. He said to take care of myself." Jordan paused. "He said I was going to be fine." Maya made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Did you believe him?" Jordan looked at the screen for a moment. On it was the architectural framework for a project they'd been building for 3 months, a framework that existed in its current form, because Daniel had cleared 6 separate bureaucratic obstacles to give Jordan the time and the resources to build it right instead of fast. "I'm working on it," Jordan said. Maya uncrossed her arms and sat down in the empty chair across from his desk. Not her chair, she had her own workspace on the other side of the floor, but she sat down like she needed the weight of a chair beneath her, and this one happened to be available. "What do we do?" she asked. It was a genuine question. Not rhetorical, not dramatic. Maya was one of the most self-sufficient people Jordan had ever worked with. A woman who had walked away from 2 jobs before Everstone because she refused to let mediocre management turn her into a mediocre designer. And she was sitting across from him asking, "What do we do?" which told Jordan more about the severity of the moment than any memo from HR could have. "We do the work," Jordan said. That's what he'd say. I know what he'd say. Maya looked at the floor. "I'm asking what we actually do." Neither of them had an answer for that. Not yet. 2 floors above them, Evan Reynolds was on his phone with his mother, Victoria's sister, telling her that the transition had gone smoothly. He used the word smoothly. He believed it. 3 floors above that, Victoria Reynolds was sitting alone in the executive conference room, looking at the crack in the glass table, and doing what capable people do when something has gone wrong in a way they didn't predict. She was constructing, very quickly and very efficiently, a version of events in which the outcome was still acceptable. Daniel had been emotional, impulsive. He had made a rash decision he would likely regret in 48 hours. These things happened with long-tenured employees when leadership transitions occurred. It was, in fact, a known phenomenon. She had read about it. There was probably a case study. She was very good at this, at the rapid reframing that keeps a person in authority from having to sit with the discomfort of a mistake. It was one of the skills that had taken her to the top of a company. It was also, though she would not have described it this way, the skill that had created the crack in the table. She called Gerald into the room and told him the transition would proceed on schedule. Evan would be formally introduced to the division the following Monday. She wanted a company-wide communication drafted by end of day. Professional, positive, emphasizing continuity and strategic vision. Gerald wrote it down without asking questions. After he left, Victoria looked at the crack one more time. Then she called facilities and told them to replace the table. By Friday it was gone. A new table identical in every visible way stood in its place. The crack, at least, was taken care of. She had no idea what else was already beginning to fracture. The first Monday, Evan Reynolds walked into the Innovation and Development Division as its official head. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most of the team's monthly car payments. He carried a leather portfolio and a genuinely warm smile, and in the first 10 minutes, he shook every hand in the room and used every name correctly, which meant he had studied the org chart over the weekend, which was not nothing. Jordan gave him credit for that, privately. It was the kind of preparation that showed at least baseline respect for the people he was meeting. What Evan said, after the handshakes, was this: "I want you all to know that I'm not here to change what works. I'm here to build on it. Everything this team has accomplished is the foundation I want to grow from. So I'm going to spend my first 2 weeks listening before I do any talking." It was a good speech, practiced but good. Several people nodded. Chris, who was suspicious of everything by default, nodded slightly less than everyone else, but he nodded. Maya did not nod. She stood at the back of the room with her arms at her sides, and her expression in that particular neutral position she used when she had decided to withhold judgment until she had actual evidence. She was giving him the benefit of the doubt. That was the most she had. Jordan nodded, because Jordan still, despite everything, believed that people generally meant what they said until they demonstrated otherwise. Evan spent his first 2 weeks doing exactly what he'd promised. He sat in on meetings and didn't speak much. He read reports. He requested access to every project file in the system. He asked questions that were, taken individually, entirely reasonable. What's the timeline on this? Who's the primary contact on the client side? What's the dependency chain look like? And then, at the start of week 3, he called a full team meeting and laid out what he called a new performance infrastructure. Daily progress reports. Each team member would submit a written summary of completed and planned tasks every morning by 9 o'clock. Bi-weekly individual check-ins with Evan, 30 minutes each, structured around a template he'd developed. A new project tracking system, different from the one Daniel had implemented. More granular, with real-time status updates that Evan could monitor from his dashboard. A weekly Friday review meeting, 90 minutes, mandatory attendance. He presented all of this on a slide deck. It was a clean slide deck. Professional fonts, the Everstone logo in the corner of every slide. He had clearly put significant work into it. Jordan looked at the slides and felt something tighten in his chest that he couldn't immediately name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was closer to the feeling of watching someone take apart a piece of machinery they didn't build and didn't fully understand, piece by piece, with complete confidence. Because the machinery currently worked, and they assumed it would keep working no matter what they removed. He looked across the room at Maya. Maya was looking at the slide that described the new check-in protocol, the one that required creative progress updates every morning by 9. Her expression had not changed from its neutral position, but something behind her eyes had gone very still. After the meeting, Jordan caught up with her in the hall. "You okay?" he asked. "The 9 o'clock report," she said. "Yeah. That's my window." Her voice was flat. "That's the 3 hours I need to actually work. If I'm writing progress reports at 9, I lose the window. If I lose the window..." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I know how this goes. I've done this before, twice." "Maybe it won't be every day," Jordan said, because he was the kind of person who reached for the version that might still be okay. Maya looked at him. "He put it on a slide," she said. "It's already every day." She walked back to her desk. Jordan stood in the hall for a moment, looking at the closed conference room door. Through the frosted glass, he could see Evan's shape already on his phone, already moving to the next thing, already sure that the meeting had gone well, because it had looked like it went well. Everything Evan did looked like it was going well. That was the problem Jordan couldn't figure out how to name yet. There was nothing wrong, specifically, with anything Evan was implementing. Individual pieces of the new system were defensible, even sensible in a different context. Daily accountability, structured check-ins, real-time project tracking, these were not radical ideas. Plenty of successful organizations used versions of all of them. But Evan had walked into a system built entirely on invisible knowledge and begun replacing its components with visible ones. He could see the visible ones. He could point to them, measure them, defend them to executives. He could not see the invisible ones because nobody had told him they existed, and because they didn't appear in any document he'd been given, and because Daniel Carter was no longer in the building. 4 weeks in, Jordan called Daniel for the first time since the parking garage conversation. It was a Saturday. Jordan was at home, at his kitchen table, with 3 weeks of project files spread in front of him and a growing suspicion that something was wrong, that he couldn't fully articulate yet. Daniel picked up on the second ring. "How's it going?" Daniel asked. He didn't ask it the way people ask, when they don't really want to know. He asked it with the specific directness of a man who has already correctly guessed the answer, and is giving you the space to say it yourself. Jordan looked at the files. He changed the tracking system. "I heard Maya's losing her morning window." A pause. "Has she said anything to him?" "Not yet. You know how Maya is. She'll hold it until she can't hold it anymore, and then she'll leave." Another pause longer. "Yeah," Daniel said, "I know. Is there anything?" Jordan stopped, started again. "Is there anything we should be doing, as a team, to, I don't know, manage the transition better?" There was a long silence on the line. Not the silence of a man who doesn't know what to say. The silence of a man who is carefully deciding how much of what he knows is his to give away right now. "Jordan," Daniel said finally, "what did I always tell you about problems?" Jordan exhaled. "Name them before they get big, so name them." Clearly, to him directly. Give him the chance to get it right. Daniel paused. "He's not a bad person. He just doesn't know what he doesn't know. That's fixable, but only if someone tells him. And if he doesn't listen?" Silence. "Then at least you named it," Daniel said. "And you know what you're dealing with." Jordan said goodbye, and sat with his files for a long time after that. Outside his window, the Saturday morning was doing what Saturday mornings do. Normal, ordinary, unbothered. He sat there and tried to figure out how to walk into his manager's office on Monday and explain, to a Columbia MBA with 3 years of consulting experience and the CEO's full confidence, that the reason the division worked was not the things he could see. He tried to figure out how to say that without it sounding like grief, because that was what it was starting to feel like. Grief. The specific, disorienting grief of watching something you depended on disappear, and not being able to explain to anyone else exactly what is gone. He didn't sleep well that night. The Monday morning after Jordan's call, Maya submitted her 9 o'clock progress report for the first time. It took her 45 minutes to write it, because Maya did not do anything carelessly, including things she resented doing. She wrote a thorough, professional, detailed summary of her current work and her planned activities for the day. By the time she sent it, her 3-hour window was 50 minutes shorter than it needed to be. She sat at her desk and stared at her design screen and waited for the work to start. It didn't come the way it usually came, in a current, effortless and involuntary, pulling her forward before she'd consciously decided to begin. It came in pieces, interrupted. She kept thinking about the report, about what she needed to write tomorrow, about the check-in meeting on Thursday. She produced 4 hours of work in 8 hours that day. She went home and didn't tell anyone how it felt, because Maya was not a person who shared the interior details of her creative process with people who hadn't earned that information. But she opened her laptop that evening and updated her resume for the first time in 4 years. She wasn't ready to use it yet. She just needed to know it was there. Week 6 brought the first real crisis, though Evan didn't recognize it as one, until it was already past the point where easy intervention was possible. He assigned Chris and Olivia to the same deliverable. It wasn't an unreasonable assignment on its face. They were the 2 strongest data scientists on the team. The project, a complex predictive model for a major client account, needed the best people available. Evan looked at the org chart, looked at the skill profiles, and made the logical decision. What he didn't know, what wasn't written anywhere, what lived only in Daniel Carter's head and in 6 years of careful project architecture, was that putting Chris and Olivia on the same deliverable was like placing 2 live wires in direct contact and then being surprised by the spark. The first 3 days were civil. They were professionals. They knew how to begin. By day 4, they were sending emails to each other that were CC'd to Evan, which in any functional team is the organizational equivalent of a formal declaration of war. The emails were polite. They were devastatingly polite. Each one contained a complete architectural argument dressed up in collaborative language, and each one was a direct repudiation of the other's entire approach. Jordan read the CC'd emails and felt his stomach drop in a way that was almost physical. He went to Evan's office. "I need to talk to you about the Chen Park project," he said. Evan looked up. He had the expression of someone who had not yet classified this as a problem. "What about it?" "Chris and Olivia can't work on the same deliverable." Jordan said it directly, because Daniel had taught him that indirectness about important things was a form of dishonesty. It's not a personality conflict in the normal sense. It's a fundamental methodological opposition that doesn't resolve through communication or mediation. Daniel spent years structuring their work so they never had to directly collaborate. It worked. The current setup won't. Evan leaned back in his chair. His expression shifted into the particular configuration of a man who has just been told something that conflicts with his own assessment of reality and is deciding how seriously to take the information. "I appreciate the context," he said. "But two talented professionals should be able to work through methodological differences. That's what collaboration is." "With respect," Jordan said, and he kept his voice level. "That's not what's happening here. What's happening is a structural incompatibility that doesn't improve under pressure. It gets worse." Evan looked at him for a moment. "Let me see how it develops," he said. "I'll keep an eye on it." Jordan walked out of the office. He sat down at his desk, pulled up a blank document, and typed 2 sentences. "I told him." He didn't listen. Then he closed the document without saving it, because Daniel had told him to name problems, not keep score. But he knew, with the certainty that comes from watching something happen in slow motion, exactly what was coming. It took 9 more days. The blow-up happened on a Thursday afternoon in the open workspace, in front of 4 other people, at a volume that brought 3 people from adjacent teams to the doorway of the bullpen to see what was happening. It started over a single data interpretation, whether a specific cluster in the model represented a trend or an outlier, and escalated with the speed of a fire that had been waiting for oxygen. Chris said Olivia's iterative methodology had produced garbage inputs. Olivia said Chris's systems architecture was so rigid it couldn't accommodate reality. Chris said that was the most reductive thing he had heard in his entire professional career. Olivia said she had been thinking that about his work for 2 years, and was glad she finally had the opportunity to say it out loud. 2 more people appeared in the doorway. Evan arrived 4 minutes later, after someone knocked on his office door. He walked into a room where 2 of his best people were standing 6 feet apart, with the particular stillness of people who have run out of words and are now simply sustaining the violence of their mutual contempt with eye contact. "Okay," Evan said. His voice was admirably steady. "Everyone take a breath. Let's go to the conference room." The conference room conversation lasted 2 hours. Evan was professional throughout it. He asked questions. He tried to find common ground. He suggested a modified collaboration structure that would allow their methodologies to coexist on separate tracks. Both Chris and Olivia agreed to the modified structure with the polite glacial civility of 2 people who have said everything they need to say, and are now simply waiting for this particular interaction to be over. They left the conference room and went back to their desks. That evening, Chris applied for a position at a competitor company. He didn't tell anyone. He just did it quietly, the way people do things quietly when they've already made a decision and are simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Olivia spent 40 minutes on the phone with her mentor from graduate school, asking whether the research position she'd been offered 18 months ago was still potentially available. Her mentor said he'd make some calls. Neither of them quit that week. They were professionals. They came in every morning and did their work. But something had changed in the quality of their presence, something small and fundamental that was visible if you knew what you were looking at and invisible if you didn't. Evan did not know what he was looking at. He wrote up the Thursday incident in the team performance log as resolved and moved to the next item on his agenda. The client calls started going wrong in week 8. Everstone's Innovation and Development Division served 11 major accounts, and several of them had, over the years, developed relationships with the division that were built around their confidence in Daniel Carter specifically, not the company. not the brand Daniel. They called his cell when they had concerns. They trusted his read on technical risk. They knew that when Daniel told them something was going to work, it was going to work. Because he didn't tell them things were going to work until he was certain. Evan inherited the accounts. He did not inherit the relationships. He was competent on the calls. He was informed. He had read every account file, and he asked the right questions. But there is a difference between competent and trusted, and it is not a difference that can be closed in 8 weeks. One client, a regional healthcare company that had been with Everstone for 7 years, called Evan to discuss a concern about a deliverable timeline. Evan handled the call correctly by every measurable standard. He addressed the concern. He offered a revised schedule. He was professional and clear. 2 days later, the client called Victoria Reynolds directly. They weren't threatening to leave. They were just checking in, asking how things were going with the team, mentioning, in the measured and careful language of people who have been in business a long time, that they valued the relationship and hoped the transition hadn't created any disruption. Victoria reassured them warmly and hung up. Then she sat at her desk and thought about that call for a long time. Because 7-year clients didn't call CEOs to check in. They called CEOs when they were worried about something they didn't want to say directly to the person who gave them the worry. She pulled up the division's performance data for the last 2 months. The numbers were still acceptable. Not exceptional, they'd been exceptional under Daniel, consistently for 4 straight years, but acceptable. Within range, no major failures, no client losses. But Victoria had been running a company for 20 years. She knew the difference between growth that was building and performance that was coasting on momentum. She knew the particular quality of numbers that looked fine on the surface because the people producing them were running on the reserves of a system that was no longer being maintained. She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called Gerald. "How's the team doing?" she asked, honestly. Gerald paused for just a moment too long. "They're adjusting." "Adjusting how?" Another pause. "There was an incident between Chris and Olivia last month. Evan handled it. Victoria was quiet." "What kind of incident?" Gerald told her. Briefly, professionally, with the carefully selected detail of a man who was giving his boss information she'd asked for without volunteering anything she hadn't. After she hung up, Victoria sat for a moment with a feeling she was not accustomed to sitting with. It was not quite guilt. It was the precursor to guilt, the moment before you've fully admitted to yourself that something you did created a consequence you didn't intend. She pushed it aside and called Evan. "How are things really going?" she asked. "Really well," Evan said immediately, with the confidence of a man who genuinely believed it. "The team is adjusting to the new systems. The Chris-Olivia situation is behind us. Numbers are holding. Have you had any issues with client relationships?" A brief pause. "Nothing significant. One call that needed a little extra attention, but I managed it." Victoria said nothing for a moment. "Then okay, keep me posted." After she hung up, Evan sat in his office and thought about whether there was something he was missing. He ran through the past 8 weeks, methodically. The new systems were functioning. The team was producing. The performance metrics were within range. He could not identify the problem, which was, though he didn't know it yet, the problem. The thing about invisible work is that you cannot see it disappearing. You can only see the results of its absence, and only after enough time has passed that the absence has had consequences. Daniel Carter's presence in that division had been, for 10 years, like the foundation of a building, structural, load-bearing, and completely invisible to anyone standing inside, looking at the walls and the windows and the furniture. Evan had walked in and changed the furniture, repainted some walls, added new windows, and the building had held, because foundations don't fail in the first month. They hold, they absorb the new weight. They carry the new arrangement with the strength that was built into them before anyone new arrived. But week by week, invisibly, the cracks were forming. And the people inside the building, Jordan at his desk at 11 at night, Maya updating her resume on a Tuesday evening, Chris with a new application in a competitor's portal, Olivia with a call to an old mentor, they could feel it before they could name it. The particular tremor of a structure under stress. The vibration that hasn't become sound yet, but is already there if you know how to feel for it. Jordan felt it most clearly, because Jordan had the most practice paying attention to things that didn't announce themselves. On a Thursday night in week 9, he sat in his car in the parking garage, the same garage, The same level, the same corner where he'd sat 2 years ago on a night, when he didn't think he could stay, and he called Daniel. It rang 4 times, 5. Jordan was about to give up when the line connected. "Hey," Daniel's voice. Steady, unhurried, exactly what it had always been. "Hey." Jordan didn't know how to start, so he started with the truth. "I think it's falling apart." A long breath on the other end. Not surprise, recognition. "Tell me," Daniel said. And Jordan did. He told him about Maya's window, about Chris and Olivia, about the client who'd called Victoria directly, about the numbers that looked fine and weren't, about the way Evan walked through the division every morning, seeing a team that was functional and missing entirely the team that was fracturing. Daniel listened without interrupting. That was one of the things, the invisible things that he did. He gave people the space to finish their own sentences. When Jordan was done, there was a silence. Then Daniel said, "You named it. That matters, even if nobody else sees it yet." "What do I do with that?" Jordan asked. "You keep showing up," Daniel said. "You protect what you can protect. You do the work you know how to do, and the rest?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Some things," Daniel said quietly, "only become visible when they're gone. And sometimes the only way a person learns what they lost is to feel the weight of not having it." Jordan sat in the car. Outside the garage, Columbus, Ohio was doing what it always did on Thursday nights in spring. Ordinary and unbothered and completely unaware of the particular grief happening inside one car in one parking structure. "Do you miss it?" Jordan asked. He hadn't meant to ask that. It came out anyway, a long pause. "I miss the people," Daniel said. "Every single day." The call ended a few minutes later. Jordan sat for a while after, looking at the concrete wall in front of him. Then he started the car, drove home, and made himself dinner. He ate it at his kitchen table with the project files still spread in front of him, reading them the way a man reads something he already knows, but needs to see again just to be sure. He was the last one who still understood the whole architecture, the last one who could see where each piece connected to every other piece. And he was sitting here alone with that knowledge, in the garage, at dinner, at his desk, carrying the weight of it the way Daniel had carried it for 10 years. The thought arrived quietly, without drama. This is how Daniel felt. Every day, for a decade. The sheer size of that thought sat with him until he went to bed. He did not sleep well. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Carter was helping his daughter Lily finish a book report on a story about a kid who figured out that the most important people in a group were almost never the loudest ones. Lily had underlined that sentence. She'd shown it to her father and said, "This is true, right?" Daniel had looked at the sentence for a moment. "Yeah, baby," he said. "That's true." She went back to writing her report. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his cold coffee and his phone, and the weight of knowing exactly, precisely, with the clarity that only comes from lived experience, what was currently happening on the 11th floor of a building 12 miles away. He didn't call Evan. He didn't call Victoria. He had told Jordan what he believed. Some things only become visible when they're gone. The question was how much had to break before the right person finally looked at the rubble and understood what they were seeing. Week 10 started on a Monday that felt like every other Monday, which was the most dangerous kind. Evan Reynolds arrived at 8:15, coffee in hand, leather portfolio under his arm, already composing mental bullet points for the weekly alignment meeting. He walked through the bullpen the way he always did, with the forward momentum of a man who believes the room is moving in the direction he's pointed it. He nodded at people. He said good morning. He asked Jordan how the weekend was. Jordan said fine. He asked Maya if she was ready for the Thursday client presentation. Maya said yes. He went into his office, opened his laptop, and pulled up the performance dashboard. Numbers acceptable, project timelines holding, no red flags in the system. He genuinely believed things were going well. That was the moment Jordan understood something that changed everything. Standing at his desk, watching Evan settle into his chair through the glass office wall, Jordan realized the problem wasn't that Evan was wrong about the numbers. The numbers were okay. The problem was that Evan had confused the numbers with the team. He had looked at the dashboard and seen health. He had not looked at the people and seen what was actually there. Maya, sitting 20 feet away, was producing work at 60% of her capability, and everyone except Jordan could tell the difference, because Jordan had spent 4 years watching her at 100%. Chris was physically present and mentally 3/4 gone. He'd had 2 phone calls with the competitor company. Jordan knew because Chris had taken both calls outside, near the stairwell, and Jordan had passed him both times by accident. And Chris had looked at him with the particular expression of a man doing something he hasn't decided yet whether to feel guilty about. Olivia had sent an email to her graduate school mentor that Monday morning. Jordan only knew because she'd accidentally CC'd the wrong address, and the bounce notification had gone to the shared team inbox, and Jordan had seen the subject line before he closed it. Research position availability following up. He closed it, deleted it from the shared inbox, did not tell anyone. But he sat at his desk that morning and understood, with the kind of clarity that arrives quietly and then refuses to leave, that Daniel's team was dissolving. Not loudly, not dramatically. One private phone call and one late-night resume update and one misdirected email at a time. The way good things end when nobody is watching them closely enough. He picked up his phone and almost called Daniel, put it down, picked it up again. Then he did something that surprised himself. He went to Evan's office instead. He knocked on the open door. Evan looked up. "Jordan, come in." Jordan sat down across from him. He thought about how Daniel used to sit in this same chair, not Evan's chair. The other chair, the one on the same side of the desk as the person he was talking to. Because Daniel believed that conversations that mattered shouldn't have a desk between them. Evan had rearranged the office furniture in his second week. "I need to tell you something," Jordan said, "and I want you to hear it as information, not as a complaint." Evan set down his coffee. His posture shifted slightly, the micro-adjustment of a person who has registered that what's coming requires actual attention. Jordan gave him credit for that too. "I'm listening," Evan said. "Maya is going to leave." Jordan said it directly, because that was the only way to say it. "Not this week, maybe not this month, but she's going to leave. And when she goes, you're going to lose the most important, creative resource this division has. And you're not going to be able to replace her, because the kind of work she does at her best is not something you find on a job posting." Evan was quiet for a moment. "What makes you say that?" "Because I know her. I've worked with her for 4 years. And the 9 o'clock progress report is destroying her process." Jordan leaned forward slightly. "I know it looks like accountability. I know the intent is legitimate. But Maya's creative output runs on a specific rhythm, and that report interrupts the rhythm at exactly the wrong time every single morning. Her output is down, significantly. If you compare what she's producing now to what she was producing 6 months ago, you can see it in the work itself." Evan picked up his pen, held it without writing anything. "Has she come to you with this concern directly?" Maya doesn't come to people with concerns directly. She removes herself from situations that compromise her work. That's what she's done at every job before this one. "I'm coming to you directly, because I watched Daniel catch this exact pattern twice, before it became a resignation, and both times he caught it by paying attention to things that don't show up in the dashboard." The mention of Daniel's name landed in the room with a weight that both of them felt. Evan set the pen down. "What would you suggest? Let her self-report her creative milestones weekly instead of daily. Give her the morning window. You'll see the difference in the work within 2 weeks, and the difference in the work is the entire argument." Evan was quiet for a long moment. Jordan could see him processing it, the particular deliberate processing of a man who has been trained to evaluate information systematically, and is now trying to apply training to something that doesn't fit neatly into a system. "I'll think about it," Evan said. Jordan stood up. He knew what "I'll think about it" meant. It meant the information had been received and filed, and would be weighed against other considerations that Jordan was not privy to, and in the meantime, nothing would change. He walked back to his desk, sat down and pulled up his work. He had done what Daniel told him to do. He had named it, clearly, to the person who could act on it. He thought about the second part of what Daniel said. "Then at least you know what you're dealing with." Evan sent a company-wide email 4 days later modifying the progress report protocol. Daily reports would continue, but creative roles had the option to submit consolidated updates 3 times per week instead of daily. It was a compromise, a visible one, a documentable one. Maya read the email. She read it twice. Then she went to the kitchen, got a cup of coffee, came back to her desk, and sat down with the particular stillness of someone deciding whether a thing is enough. It wasn't enough, but it was something, and something, from a man who until 4 days ago hadn't known the problem existed, was more than she had expected. She closed the job search tab she'd had open in her browser for 9 days. She didn't delete her updated resume, but she closed the tab. Jordan saw her close it from across the room. Not because he was watching her, he wasn't watching her. But he noticed things. He always noticed things. He was beginning to understand both a gift and a specific kind of weight. He thought, Daniel must have felt this every single day for 10 years. Then he went back to his code. The second major break happened in week 12, and this one Victoria Reynolds felt personally. The healthcare client, the 7-year account that had called Victoria to check in, had submitted a formal notice of concern. Not a termination notice, a concern notice, which in the language of enterprise contracts was the business equivalent of a yellow card. We are not leaving yet, but we are telling you officially that something has changed, and we need a response. Victoria read the notice in her office with the door closed. Then she read it again. The concern was specific. The division had missed 2 internal milestones on a deliverable. Both misses were minor hours, not days, but the client's contract had language requiring formal documentation of any deviation from agreed timelines, and they were exercising that language. The subtext of the notice, which was entirely clear to anyone fluent in the dialect of long-term business relationships, was, "We trusted the previous management of this account. We are not yet confident in the current management of this account, and this notice is our way of saying so without saying so." Victoria called Gerald. "Get me everything on the Meridian Healthcare account for the last 6 months," she said. "I want the timeline deviations, the client communication logs, and the deliverable records." All of it. Gerald had it to her in 90 minutes. She sat with the files for 2 hours. The missed milestones were real. Small, but real. The client communication logs showed something more revealing. Under Daniel, the account had received proactive status updates before milestones, not responses after deviations. The client had been inside the process, consistently informed, always knowing what was coming before it arrived. Under Evan, the communication pattern had shifted to reactive. Updates came after questions. Questions came after concerns. It was not a catastrophic failure. It was a subtle erosion of the specific kind of trust that takes years to build and much less time to lose. Victoria closed the files. She sat for a long time. She had built this company on her ability to make clear-eyed assessments without the distortion of ego or sentiment. She was going to apply that ability right now to a situation she had created, and she was going to be honest about what she found. She called Evan. He answered on the first ring. "Victoria. I got the Meridian notice," she said. A pause, shorter than it should have been. "I saw that this morning. I've already drafted a response." "I'm not calling about the response." Her voice was even. Not cold. Even. "I'm calling because I want to understand account management structure. How we're handling client communication proactively, not reactively." Evan walked her through the system. It was a good system. It was a logical system. It was structurally almost identical to systems used by every mid to large technology company managing enterprise accounts. What it was not was Daniel's system. Victoria listened to the whole explanation. Then she said, "When did we last reach out to Meridian before they reached out to us?" Silence. Not a long silence, maybe 4 seconds. But 4 seconds of silence in a conversation with the CEO of your company, when you are supposed to know the answer to a question about your most important account, is a very long silence. "I'll get you that information," Evan said. "Thank you," Victoria said. She hung up. She sat for a moment with a thought that she had been successfully not having for 11 weeks. The thought was simple and devastating, and she let herself have it for exactly as long as it took to complete itself. She had made a mistake, not in choosing Evan. She stood by Evan. He was capable and earnest and working genuinely hard. The mistake was in what she had assumed when she replaced Daniel Carter. She had assumed that the division's performance was a product of the team's talent and the company's resources and the systems she had put in place over 20 years of running the organization. She had not considered, not seriously, not with the weight the question deserved, that the performance was a product of a specific person doing specific things that nobody had documented, taught, or transferred before he walked out of the building. She opened her computer and pulled up Daniel Carter's HR file. She hadn't looked at it in months. She read it from the beginning: warehouse intake form, first performance review, the lateral moves through departments, the promotion into division leadership, 12 consecutive quarters of exceptional performance ratings, 0 HR incidents. 0 client complaints, 1 annual compensation review note that said, in Gerald's careful administrative language, employee has consistently declined increases in title and visibility. Focused requests on team resources rather than personal advancement. She read that last line 3 times. She had read it in real time when it was written. She had noted it the way you note a pleasant but ultimately decorative fact. Oh, how refreshingly modest, and moved on to the next item. She understood now what it actually said. Daniel Carter had spent 10 years asking for things for his people, not for himself. Every resource request, every budget conversation, every negotiation she could remember having with him, all of it, had been on behalf of someone else on his team. He had never once come to her office asking for something for Daniel Carter. She closed the file. She picked up her phone, looked at it for a moment. Then she put it back down because she wasn't ready yet. Because the question she needed to ask him was too large to ask impulsively, and because she needed to understand the full size of what had happened before she could figure out what, if anything, could be done about it. She called Gerald instead. I need an honest assessment, she said. Not the official one, the honest one. What's actually happening in the I&D division? Gerald was quiet for exactly long enough to make a decision about how much honesty his career could afford right now. The numbers are holding, he said carefully. Gerald. Another pause. The team is there are some retention concerns. Nothing formal yet, but the kind of quiet movement that precedes formal. Who? I can't say definitively. But the people Daniel built the team around. The core contributors. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. What else? Client confidence is softer than the metrics show. The Meridian notice is the first formal one. But there have been 2 other accounts that have escalated questions up the chain in the last month. Nothing that became a formal notice. But the questions came from accounts that never asked questions before. Because they trusted Daniel, Victoria thought. They didn't need to ask questions because Daniel answered them before they formed. Thank you, Gerald, she said, for the honest answer. After she hung up, she stood up from her desk and walked to the window. She looked out at the city, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon city, going about its business with no awareness of the specific reckoning happening on the 14th floor of one building. She thought about the crack in the table, the one she'd had replaced. You can replace the table, she thought. You cannot replace the foundation. The third breaking point arrived in week 14, and it arrived in the form of a resignation letter. It was not Maya's, it was not Chris's, it was not Olivia's. It was Rachel Kim's. Rachel was not one of the high-profile names on Daniel's team. She was not a brilliant systems engineer, or a creative force, or a data science specialist. She was a project coordinator, the person who held the administrative structure of the division together, who tracked dependencies, managed timelines, liaised between technical teams and client-facing staff, and remembered the 300 small details that kept 12 complicated people organized and moving in the same direction. Daniel had hired Rachel in his 3rd year of leading the division. He had found her in the company's marketing department, where she was dramatically overqualified for her role, and he had moved her to his team with the specific observation that she had an unusual ability to understand how systems interacted with human beings, not just with each other. Rachel had thrived. Under Daniel, she had grown from a coordinator into the connective tissue of the entire division. She knew everything. She knew which client preferred email to phone calls, which engineer needed 48 hours of runway before a deadline to produce their best work, which vendor relationship needed a personal touch once a quarter to stay warm. She held all of it in her head with the same effortless fluency that Daniel held the people. She was also, critically, the person who had absorbed the most institutional knowledge from working alongside Daniel for 7 years. And she was leaving. Her resignation letter was 2 paragraphs. Professional, warm, grateful. She had accepted a position at another organization. Her last day would be in 3 weeks. Evan read it at 7:30 in the morning and felt something he hadn't felt in 14 weeks of running this division, genuine alarm. He went to her desk before 9. I got your letter, he said. He sat down in the chair across from her, the same move Daniel would have made, though Evan didn't know that. Can we talk about it? Rachel looked at him. She was 33, precise, and had the kind of direct gaze that meant she had already thought through every version of this conversation. Of course, she said. Is it compensation? Because that's something we can address. It's not compensation. Is there something about the role that isn't working? Because I want to know, specifically. Rachel looked at him for a moment. She made a decision. Evan, she said, can I be completely honest with you? Please. She folded her hands on her desk. The role is fine. The compensation is fine. You've been reasonable to work for. This is not about anything you've done wrong. Then what is it? It's about what's been lost. She said it simply, without blame. This division ran on a kind of invisible infrastructure that Daniel built over 10 years. I was part of that infrastructure. I knew things that weren't written down anywhere: client preferences, team dynamics, the history behind decisions that looked arbitrary, unless you understood the context they came from. For 7 years, Daniel and I operated as a system. After he left, I became the last person holding that institutional knowledge, and I've spent 14 weeks watching it erode, because there's no one to transfer it to and no framework to transfer it through. She paused. I'm leaving because staying means watching something I helped build disappear piece by piece, and I can't do that indefinitely. Evan was very quiet. I want to understand, he said finally. What would have made the difference? If you could go back to day one of this transition, what would have needed to be different? Rachel looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, a small softening, the recognition that he was asking a real question and deserved a real answer. You needed to know what you were inheriting before you changed anything, she said. Not the org chart, not the project files, the actual system. The people map. Who depended on whom for what? Which relationships were structural and which were personal? What Daniel did every single week that made the formal systems function. She paused. You walked in and saw a working machine. You didn't know the machine was working because of something invisible inside it. And nobody told you, because nobody thought to explain it, and Daniel wasn't there to explain it himself. Evan sat with that. It landed differently than Jordan's conversation had landed. Jordan had brought him specific operational concerns. Rachel was handing him the entire architecture of his own blind spot, drawn in clean and unavoidable lines. If I asked you to stay, he said, and I gave you the authority to document everything you know about how this division actually functions, every piece of invisible infrastructure you've described, would that change your decision? Rachel looked at him for a long moment. She had not expected that question. She had expected negotiation, counteroffers, the usual retention toolkit. Maybe, she said carefully, but Evan, documenting it now is like trying to draw a map after you've already taken the city apart. The most important context is the relationships, and some of those are already damaged. Chris is halfway out the door. Maya is still here, but she's holding on by a thread that has nothing to do with the organization, and everything to do with her own professional pride. The Meridian account is formally concerned. 2 other accounts are informally concerned. She paused. I can document what I know. But you need to understand that some of what was here is already gone. And Daniel? Evan asked. He said the name carefully, the way you say a name that has become a slightly uncomfortable presence in every room. Is there a version of this where he comes back? Where we bring him back in some capacity? Rachel studied him. You'd have to ask your aunt that, she said. But Evan, before you think about whether he'd come back, I'd think about why he left. She said it without cruelty. She said it the way someone says something true, when they've decided the kindest thing they can do is say it directly. Evan walked back to his office, closed the door, and sat at his desk for a full 10 minutes without doing anything. Then he called his aunt. Victoria picked up on the second ring. I need to talk to you about the division, Evan said. Honestly, not the official version. There was a pause on Victoria's end. Short, but the kind of pause that meant something. Come up, she said, now. The conversation between Victoria and Evan lasted 40 minutes. It was the most honest conversation they had ever had, which was both a measure of how serious the situation had become, and a reflection of the fact that honest conversations in family-run power structures are usually delayed until crisis makes them unavoidable. Evan told her everything, Rachel's resignation, what Rachel had said about invisible infrastructure, Jordan's concerns from weeks earlier, Maya's fragile thread, Chris's halfway out posture, the client softness that Gerald had confirmed. Victoria listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't reassure. She sat across from him in the executive conference room, the room with the new table, the one without the crack, and she listened with the full attention of a woman who had finally stopped constructing the version of events where her decision had been correct. When Evan finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," she said. Evan looked at her. He hadn't expected that either. "I put you in an impossible position," she said. "I handed you a division without handing you the knowledge to run it. I assumed the machine would keep running because it had run well for a long time. I didn't ask what was inside it." She stopped. "I made a mistake, Evan. The decision to restructure leadership the way I did, that was my mistake, not yours. You've done what any capable person would do, with the information you were given." Evan absorbed that. He was 32 years old, and he had spent the last 14 weeks moving through a role with the complete confidence of a person who had been told he was ready. He had not known, walking in, that the confidence was built on a foundation of missing information. And now, sitting across from his aunt, he understood for the first time how completely he hadn't known what he didn't know. "What do we do?" he asked, the same question Maya had asked Jordan in week 2. The question the situation kept generating regardless of who was in the room. Victoria looked at the table, the new, uncracked table. "We have to call Daniel," she said. Evan was quiet. "I should have done it weeks ago," she said. "I should have done it the day Rachel walked into your office. I should have done it the day Meridian sent the notice. I should have—" She stopped, made herself stop. This was not the moment for the full inventory. "I should have done it sooner. Will he come?" Evan asked. Victoria thought about the badge hitting the glass table. The 7 words. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I have to ask." She picked up her phone, found Daniel's number, looked at it for a moment, not hesitating. Exactly, but taking in the full weight of what she was about to admit by making this call. She pressed the number. It rang 3 times, 4. She was preparing herself for voicemail when the line connected. "Victoria," Daniel's voice, calm, unhurried, exactly what it had always been. She closed her eyes briefly. "Open them, Daniel," she said. "I need to ask you something, and before I ask it, I want to say something first." A pause. "Okay, I was wrong." She said it without preamble, without softening, without the executive language that turns admissions into footnotes. "I made a decision that I believed was strategically sound, and I didn't ask the questions I should have asked before I made it. I didn't know what I was removing when I restructured the leadership. I thought I did, and I didn't." She stopped. "That's on me." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she thought for a moment the call had dropped. Then Daniel said, "What's happening?" "The team is fracturing. Rachel Kim is resigning. We have a formal client concern from Meridian and soft concerns from 2 other accounts. Chris is. We're losing people, Daniel. The people you built the team around. What do you want me to do about it?" "I want to understand what I missed. I want to understand what you were doing specifically, concretely, that created what that team was. Because I looked through every file, every process document, every performance report, and I cannot find it." She paused. "I need you to tell me what isn't written down." Another silence. "And then," Daniel asked, "after I tell you, what then?" "I'd like you to come back." The silence that followed was the longest of all the silences in the conversation. Victoria sat with it. She had earned this silence. She let it last as long as it needed to. "Victoria," Daniel said finally, "I'm not going to give you an answer on that right now. I know, but I'll answer the first part, about what I was doing." He paused. "That question deserves a real answer, and I think you're finally ready to hear it." She exhaled. "Yes," she said, "I am. Then give me 3 days. I'll come in, not as an employee, just to talk." Another pause. "And Victoria, invite Evan to that conversation. He needs to hear it more than you do." She looked across the table at Evan, who had heard only her side of the call, but had understood enough from her face to know that something significant had just shifted. "He'll be there," she said. 3 days, Daniel said. And the line went quiet. Victoria set her phone down on the table. Evan looked at her. What did he say? She looked at her nephew, this earnest, capable, genuinely well-intentioned young man she had placed into a situation without giving him what he needed to navigate it, and she said the truest thing she could say. He said he'll come, and he said you need to hear what he has to say more than I do. Evan looked at the table, nodded slowly, the particular slow nod of someone absorbing a truth that costs something. Across the city, in a smaller office, at a company called Meridian Collaborative, a growing consultancy that had recruited in 6 weeks. After he left Everstone, Daniel set his phone down on his desk and sat for a moment. His new colleague Marcus knocked on the open door. Everything okay? Daniel looked at his phone. An old conversation just reopened, he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Good or bad? Daniel considered it. Necessary, he said. Marcus nodded and left. Daniel sat alone for a moment with the particular weight of being the person who had been right about something and was now being called back to explain how. He thought about what Lily had said at the kitchen table that morning, holding down the corners of a poster board at 6A. You get back what you give. He looked out his office window. He did not feel vindicated. He did not feel angry. He felt, honestly, tired, the specific tiredness of a man who has carried something for a long time and is now being asked to explain the carrying to people who have only just learned the thing had weight. But he had told Jordan to name things, to say the true thing clearly to the people who needed to hear it. He could do the same. He owed that much to the people who were still in that building, to Rachel, who had tried to hold the knowledge together for 14 weeks, to Jordan, who had been making late-night calls and keeping score in a document he deleted without saving, to Maya, who had closed a job search tab and kept showing up on a thread that was still holding, barely. He owed it to them. He pulled up his laptop and began to write. Not an email, not a report. The thing he had been thinking about writing for 3 months, the document that didn't exist, the one Victoria had searched for and couldn't find, the record of everything invisible. It was going to take more than 3 days to write it properly, but he had been holding it in his head for 10 years. He could start tonight. 3 days passed the way. 3 days pass when everyone involved is waiting for something they know is going to change them slowly, in the moment, and then all at once, when it arrives. Daniel spent those 3 days writing, not in the way executives write reports, with their careful language, and their strategic framing, and their footnotes designed to protect the writer as much as inform the reader. He wrote the way a man writes when he has decided that the only thing left worth doing is telling the complete truth about something that mattered. He wrote about Maya first. He wrote about the 3-hour window and why it existed and what it produced and what it cost when it was taken away. He wrote about the 2 jobs before Everstone and the specific pattern of creative destruction that careless management performs on people who need space to do exceptional work. He wrote it not as a complaint or an indictment, but as a precise operational description. Here is what this person needs. Here is why. Here is what happens when she has it. Here is what happens when she doesn't. Then he wrote about Jordan. He wrote about the parking garage and the late-night calls and the 5 specific moments over 4 years when Jordan had been on the edge of believing he didn't belong there, and what Daniel had done each time, and why it worked, and what the alternative would have cost the division. He wrote about the difference between telling someone they're good at their job and making sure they see their own work reflected in the rooms where it matters. He wrote about Chris and Olivia, the full architecture of how he'd structured 6 years of projects to extract the best of both of them without triggering the collision that lived permanently at the intersection of their methodologies. He drew it out in plain language, the way you explain something to a person who is smart enough to implement it once they understand it, which he believed Evan was. He wrote about Rachel, about what she knew, why she knew it, and how she had become, without either of them formally deciding this, the other half of the invisible system he ran. He wrote that losing Rachel was not a personnel problem. It was a structural failure with a very narrow window of recovery. By the 3rd night, he had 41 pages. He looked at them on his screen and felt the strange, clean feeling of a man who has carried something for so long that setting it down changes the actual weight of his body. He printed the document, put it in a plain folder, drove to Everstone the next morning, not as an employee, not as a former employee making a triumphant return, but as a man with 41 pages of truth that other people needed to read. He parked in the visitor lot. First time he'd ever parked there. He sat in the car for a moment, not hesitating, just taking in the particular quality of returning to a place that was once yours and is no longer yours. It was, he thought, not unlike grief, not the sharp kind, the settled kind, the kind that has made peace with itself and is no longer fighting. He picked up the folder and went inside. Victoria had reserved the small conference room on the 12th floor, not the executive suite, not the glass room where the badge had hit the table. A smaller room, with a round table that didn't put anyone at a head, which Daniel noticed and appreciated without mentioning. Evan was already there when Daniel arrived. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, and the particular stillness of a person who has rehearsed what they want to say, and then decided at the last moment to abandon the rehearsal and just be present. He stood up when Daniel walked in. Daniel, he extended his hand. Daniel shook it. This time, Evan's grip was different, not the announcing grip of week 1, the grip that said, "I have already won this." This grip was the grip of a man who knew he was in a room where he had something to learn. "Evan," Daniel said. They sat down. Victoria arrived 2 minutes later. She walked in without the composed executive posture that was her default setting in every professional room Daniel had ever shared with her. She walked in the way people walk when they have decided to stop performing and start accounting. And she sat down across from Daniel and looked at him directly. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking," he said. And then, because Daniel Carter had never been a man who spent words on preamble when the substance was the point, he opened the folder and placed the 41 pages on the table. Both of them looked at it. "This is what you couldn't find," Daniel said. "Everything I did that wasn't in any document. Every system, every relationship, every intervention, every piece of invisible infrastructure that kept that division running." He paused. "I wrote it because I think you're both ready to hear it now, and because the people still in that building deserve to have someone in that room understand it." Victoria reached for the document. She looked at the first page, then the second. Then she set it down and looked at Daniel. "Start talking," she said. Please, Daniel talked for 2 hours. He did not start with Maya or Jordan or Chris and Olivia. He started further back. He started with the question that Victoria had asked him on the phone 3 days earlier. Because he had been thinking about it for 3 days. And he had found the truest answer he knew. "You asked me what I was doing," he said. "And the honest answer is, I was noticing what everyone else decided wasn't worth noticing." Victoria was quiet. Evan had a pen in his hand but wasn't writing yet. He was listening. "Most management systems," Daniel said, "are built around the assumption that if you set up the right structure, the right incentives, the right accountability framework, people will perform." And that's partially true. Structure matters. Incentives matter. But there's a layer underneath all of that, a human layer that structure can't reach. And if nobody is working that layer, the structure starts losing pressure. Slowly, then all at once he looked at Evan when he said this. Not accusingly, directly. "You walked into this division with an excellent structural instinct," he said. "Your systems are logical. Your frameworks are defensible. Your performance infrastructure is what you'd find in any well-run technology organization. There's nothing wrong with any of it in isolation." Evan absorbed this without looking away. "But," he said, "but you inherited a team that wasn't being held together by structure," Daniel said. "It was being held together by trust. Individual, specific, earned trust between me and 12 people who each needed something different from the person leading them. When I left, I took that trust with me, not deliberately. You can't transfer trust like you transfer a file. It lives in the history between people. And there was no way to hand it to you because I'd spent 10 years building it. And there were 3 days between my walking out and you walking in." The room was very quiet. Evan put his pen down. "If you had stayed," he said, "if she had asked you to stay as a transition, not as an advisor but as a co-leader, something with actual authority, would it have worked?" Daniel looked at him. "No." Evan blinked. "No?" "Because the problem wasn't the transition structure," Daniel said. "The problem was that I was replaced for the wrong reasons. And if I had stayed knowing that the reason I was being moved aside was not performance, not strategy, but the fact that someone with the right last name wanted the role, then I would have been modeling exactly the wrong thing for every person on that team." He paused. "They were watching. They always watch. They would have learned that what you build doesn't protect you, that who you know matters more than what you do. And that lesson would have destroyed the trust from the inside." Victoria made a sound that was not quite a word, something between acknowledgement and pain. "So you had to leave," Evan said slowly, not as a question, as something he was working out. "I had to leave," Daniel said. "And you had to run it, and it had to get to where it is now, so that we're in this room having this conversation, which is the only conversation that was ever going to produce what actually needs to happen next." Evan looked at him for a long moment. "Which is what?" Daniel picked up 3 pages from the folder and laid them on the table. "Rachel Kim stays. Whatever you need to offer her, offer it. She is the last person in that building who holds the full institutional map of how the division's relationships actually work. If she walks out, you lose the last translator between the invisible system and the visible one." Evan nodded. "Done. Jordan needs public credit. Specific named visible credit in the rooms where decisions are made. Not a performance review compliment. I'm talking about Evan standing up in a client presentation and saying Jordan built this, by name, in the room where it lands. Jordan has been discounted his entire career by people who looked at him and made a decision before they saw his work. That pattern broke under me. It cannot restart under you. I understand, Evan said. Maya's window is still not fully protected, Daniel said. The 3 times a week report is better than daily, but it's still interrupting the rhythm. She needs self-directed milestone reporting on creative deliverables. Full stop. Not a compromise. The compromise is costing you work you can't quantify because you've never seen what she produces when she's fully unobstructed. Victoria spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. What would it take to get Maya to full output again? Give her back her window, Daniel said, completely. And then look at her work 6 weeks later. You'll see the difference without needing a metric to confirm it. He moved through the team systematically, each person, what they needed, what had been lost, what was coverable and what wasn't. He talked about Chris, about the competitor application that he knew about. Because Jordan had mentioned it in passing, not as gossip but as evidence, and what it would take to bring Chris back from the halfway out position he was currently occupying. He talked about Olivia and the graduate school mentor, and what the actual risk was versus the perceived risk, and what a different kind of project structure would do for her investment in staying. He laid it all out, all 41 pages of it distilled into 2 hours of the clearest conversation Victoria Reynolds had ever had in her professional life. At one point, she picked up the document and read a passage. She read it twice, then she looked up. "This is what you were doing," she said. It wasn't a question. That's what I was doing every week. Every week. She set the document down. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Daniel looked at her. The question deserved a complete answer, so he gave it one. "Because in 10 years you never asked. And every time I came to you for resources or decisions, you gave me what I needed without asking why I needed it. That was efficient, it worked. But efficiency isn't the same as understanding." He paused. "You trusted the results. You never asked about the process. And he stopped. "I didn't volunteer it. That's on me too. I thought the results spoke loudly enough. They did. But they were speaking a language that only made complete sense to me." Victoria sat with that. She sat with the full weight of it, which was considerable, and she did not minimize it, or reframe it, or find the version where it was more comfortable. She sat with it the way you sit with something true when you have finally decided to stop running from it. "I valued what I could see," she said finally, "and I didn't ask about what I couldn't." "That's it," Daniel said. "That's the whole thing." Evan had been listening with the total attention of a man who has spent 14 weeks running a machine he didn't understand and has just been handed the manual. His pen was still on the table. He hadn't written a single note, which meant he was absorbing it rather than processing it, which was, Daniel thought, exactly the right instinct for this conversation. "Can I ask you something?" Evan said. "Go ahead. When you walked out that morning, the badge, all of it, what were you actually feeling?" Daniel looked at him. It was a real question. The kind that took courage to ask in a room like this, in front of the person whose decision had caused the whole thing. Daniel gave it a real answer. "Clarity," he said. "I was feeling clarity," which sounds too clean, I know. But it's true. I had spent 10 years being the person who holds things together, and I had always held things together because the people were worth it. And when she made that call, he glanced briefly at Victoria. I understood that the people making decisions about the structure I was maintaining didn't understand what they were maintaining. And when the people making decisions about the structure don't understand it, the structure is already in danger, regardless of what I do next. So leaving wasn't surrender. It was, he looked for the right word. It was accurate. I was doing the accurate thing. Evan absorbed that. "Did you know it would fall apart?" "I knew the momentum would hold for a while." Daniel's voice was even. "And I knew what would happen after the momentum ran out. Because I understood every dependency in the system. I just didn't know the exact timeline." 6 months, Victoria said quietly. "About what I estimated," Daniel said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 3 people sitting with a truth that had taken 5 months to fully arrive, and it had a kind of weight that was also, strangely, a kind of relief. Then Victoria asked the question that had been in the room since before the meeting started, the one she had been moving toward through 41 pages and 2 hours of conversation. "Daniel," she said, "come back." He looked at her. "Not as an advisor," she said quickly. "Not in a supporting role. Full leadership of the division. Whatever the title needs to be, whatever the compensation needs to be. You rebuild what's been damaged. You build the knowledge transfer system. That should have existed before I made that decision. And you bring Evan along as your operational counterpart, so that when you eventually move on, whenever that is, on your terms, there's actually someone who understands the invisible system well enough to protect it." She paused. "That's what I should have built the first time. I'm asking you to let me build it now." Daniel was quiet. He looked at the folder. At 41 pages that represented 10 years of invisible work, finally made visible. "I have a position at Meridian Collaborative," he said. "I know. They saw what you didn't see for 3 months before you called. They built a role around the thing you tried to make into an advisory footnote. I know that too, and you want me to walk away from that." Victoria met his eyes. "I want you to consider what you owe to the people still in that building. The ones who stayed because of what you built, who are currently hanging on with both hands, waiting for something to stabilize." She paused. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to think about Jordan, about Maya, about Rachel, about what comes next for them if nothing changes." It was a ruthless argument. Victoria knew it. She made it anyway, because it was the truest version of the ask, and she had decided in this room that truth was the only currency she had left to spend. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Evan. "What do you want?" Evan didn't hesitate. "I want to learn what you know. Not to take your role. Not to run the division the way I've been running it. To understand what I've been missing and figure out how to build on it." He paused. "I walked in thinking I was ready. I wasn't. I'd rather admit that now and fix it than protect my ego and keep making the same mistakes." It was the most honest thing Evan Reynolds had said in 14 weeks. Daniel heard the truth in it and weighed it the way he weighed everything, not as performance, but as signal. He looked at the table. He thought about Lily, who was at school right now, probably in the middle of something precise and careful, probably the only person in the room who noticed when someone was struggling before they said so. He thought about what he'd told her 3 months ago at the kitchen table, the morning after he quit. Being the glue is something special, but you have to choose where you use it. He had chosen Meridian. They had seen him. They had valued him openly from the first conversation in ways that Everstone had never managed in 10 years. But the people in that building hadn't made the decision Victoria made. They had simply stayed and worked and held on because that was what people do when they believe in the thing they're part of, even when the thing is being mismanaged above them. Jordan at his desk at 11 at night, Maya with her closed job search tab, Rachel with 41 pages of knowledge she'd been holding alone for 14 weeks. He owed them the truth too, and the truth was, some things are worth going back for. Not out of obligation, not out of bitterness, but because the work mattered, and the people mattered, and sometimes the accurate thing is to return, not as a concession but as a decision. "I need a week," he said. Victoria exhaled. A genuine, involuntary exhale that released something she'd been holding since the day the badge hit the table. "Of course, there are conditions," Daniel said, "non-negotiable ones." "Tell me, first." Rachel Kim stays. "Offer her what she needs before I walk out of this building today, not after I give you my answer next week. Because Rachel's decision can't be contingent on mine." "Agreed." "Second, Evan remains in the division as my operational counterpart, with real authority, not a nominal title. He needs to learn the invisible system from the inside. That only works if he has skin in it." "Agreed," Evan said immediately. "Third, you give me full authority over personnel decisions for the division. Not advisory input, full authority. If I walk back in, I walk back in as the person the team reports to, with the trust and the structural backing to do the job the way it needs to be done." Victoria nodded. "Agreed." Fourth, Daniel paused. "You never make a leadership decision about this division again without understanding what you're changing before you change it. That's not a formal condition. It's the thing I need to hear you say you understand." Victoria looked at him. "I understand it," she said. "I understand it in a way I didn't before. And I'm not going to insult you by promising I'll be perfect, but I'm not the person who was in that executive conference room 14 weeks ago." That conversation changed me. Daniel studied her. He had spent 10 years reading rooms and reading people, and he was reading her now with the same careful attention. He had always given to things that mattered. What he saw was not just regret. He had seen regret before it was performative as often as it was genuine, and it faded as soon as the pressure that produced it faded. What he saw in Victoria was something structurally different. He saw a woman who had hit a wall, made of her own blind spot hard enough to actually reorient herself. That was rarer. That was worth something 1 week, he said. He picked up the folder and stood. Evan and Victoria both stood. He shook Victoria's hand. Then Evan's. He walked out of the room. In the hallway, he passed the elevator that he had taken on that Tuesday morning in March. He didn't take it. He took the stairs because he needed the movement, the physical grounding of descending floor by floor, the concrete reality of each step. He walked through the lobby, past the reception desk where the woman who'd worked there for 15 years longer than Daniel even said his name with a warmth that was both a greeting and a question. "Hey Maria," he said. "Good to see you. You coming back?" she asked. He smiled, a real smile, thinking about it. She nodded like that was the best news she'd had in weeks. Maybe it was. He pushed through the main doors and stood in the air for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called the one person he always called when something important had just happened. Lily picked up on the third ring. She was at her best friend's house after school. He could hear the background noise of 14-year-old life, someone's music, someone's laughter, the particular texture of a world operating at a frequency adults couldn't quite tune into anymore. "Dad, hey bug, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said. I wanted to hear your voice." A pause. She was reading him through the phone the way she'd always read him. "Did it go okay, the meeting?" "Yeah," he said, "it went okay." "Are you going to go back?" He stood on the sidewalk outside the building that had been the geography of his professional life for 10 years. He looked at the entrance, at his own reflection in the glass doors. A man with a folder of 41 pages and a 1-week deadline, and 2 companies waiting for his answer. "I'm thinking about it," he said. "Do you want my opinion?" He laughed, a real laugh. "When have I ever not wanted your opinion?" "The people need you," she said, simply, directly. The way she always said things that were completely true. Jordan and Maya and the others. You said you choose where you use it. Choose them. He stood on the sidewalk and felt the full weight of being known by someone who had learned to know him the way children learn things completely, without strategy, from the inside out. "When did you get this smart?" he said. "Dad." She said it with the specific exasperation of a kid who has answered this question too many times. "I learned it from you." He said goodbye and put his phone in his pocket. He stood for another moment, then he walked to his car. He had a week to decide. But the truth was that he had already decided, in the room, the moment Victoria said Jordan's name. The moment she used it not as an argument, but as a fact, a specific, human, irreplaceable fact. He had understood that she finally saw what she had been missing. That was all he had ever needed from her. Not perfection. Not reversal. Just the real seeing. He sat in the car. Not for long, just long enough. Then he drove to Rachel Kim's desk. He called her before he reached the parking structure exit. She answered on the first ring, because Rachel answered everything on the first ring. "It was one of the things about her, Daniel," she said. "Don't submit that resignation," he said. "Not yet. Give me 1 week," a silence, shorter than he expected. "What happened in that meeting?" She listened, he said. Actually listened, another silence. Rachel processing. He could almost hear the precise, systematic intelligence working through it. "And Evan?" Evan asked for the manual in those words. He said he'd rather admit what he doesn't know than protect his ego. A long exhale on Rachel's end. 1 week, she said. 1 week. "And you're going to give me an honest answer at the end of it." "I always give you honest answers, Rachel." "You give everyone honest answers," she said. "That's why this whole thing happened." He laughed. Quiet, brief, the compressed laugh of someone who finds truth funny when it's also painful. "Take care of yourself this week," he said. "You too," she said. "Daniel, for what it's worth. I've been here 14 weeks holding on to what you built like it was something I could personally keep alive through sheer force of will." A pause. "It was worth holding. I hope you come back." He said goodbye and drove home. That night, after dinner, after Lily went to her room, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the last 3 pages of his 41-page document. The pages he hadn't given to Victoria, not because they were secret, because they were personal. They were the pages he had written for himself at 2 in the morning on the second night, when the professional documentation had given way to something else. Something closer to a letter he'd been writing in his head since the morning he walked out. It was about why the invisible work mattered, not strategically, not operationally, but in the actual human sense, why a person chooses to be the one who holds things together, knowing that the holding will probably never be fully seen, knowing that the credit will go elsewhere, knowing that the day they stop holding, most people will only understand what they did when the weight of it lands on someone else. He had written, "The reason I did it wasn't because I didn't know my own value. It was because the people were worth it, every single one of them. And the best thing I have ever done with my life, professionally, is that for 10 years, I showed 12 people that someone saw them. Actually saw them, not their output, not their performance metrics. Them, he looked at those sentences for a long time. Then he looked at the kitchen, at the poster of Lily's solar system project from 3 months ago, that was still taped to the cabinet door because neither of them had taken it down, at the coffee mug, with the small chip in the handle that he used every morning, because it was the one that had been there the longest, at the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable details of a life built from showing up every day for the things and people that mattered. He picked up his phone, opened his contacts, found the number for his manager at Meridian Collaborative. He had a conversation he needed to have, an honest one. The only kind he knew how to have. He pressed call. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Daniel, how'd the meeting go?" "It went well," Daniel said. "That's actually why I'm calling." He took a breath. "I need to have an honest conversation with you. About something." A pause. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'm listening." And Daniel, who had spent 10 years being the person who listened, started talking. Marcus listened for 11 minutes without interrupting. That was unusual. Marcus Chen was one of the most energetically verbal people Daniel had ever worked with, a man who processed information out loud, who thought by talking, who filled silences the way water fills a container, naturally, and without apparent effort. In 3 months of working together, Daniel had never heard him go 11 seconds without contributing something to a conversation. 11 minutes of silence meant he understood the weight of what he was hearing. When Daniel finished, Marcus said, "You're going back." "It wasn't a question. I'm considering it seriously," Daniel said. "I wanted to be honest with you before I made the final call. You gave me something real when Everstone didn't. That matters to me, and you deserve to hear what I'm thinking before you hear about it another way." A pause. Then Marcus said something Daniel hadn't expected. "Can I tell you what I see from where I'm sitting?" "Please, I hired you because you were exactly what you are," Marcus said. "Someone who understands that organizations are human systems before they're anything else. And I knew when I hired you that the reason you were available was because someone somewhere had failed to see that. I built your role here around the full version of what you are." He paused. "But Daniel, I built it around one department, 12 people. What you're describing at Everstone is the chance to build something that outlasts you, a knowledge transfer system. A way of teaching invisible leadership to people who've never been taught to see it. That's not a department, that's a legacy." Daniel was quiet. "I'm not releasing you from your obligations here," Marcus said. "I'm saying that if you go back for the right reason. Not because Victoria Reynolds finally said sorry. Because the work you could do there, the real work, the 41 pages turned into a living system. That's the work that changes how companies treat the people who hold them together." Another pause. "And if you decide to stay here, I will build every resource around making that happen at this scale. Either way, Daniel, the work is the point." Daniel sat at his kitchen table for a long time after the call ended. The house was quiet. Lily was in her room, the thin line of light under her door the only sign she was still awake. He could hear faintly the sound of her music, something soft and unhurried, the kind of music she played when she was thinking about something she hadn't decided yet how to say. He sat with what Marcus had said. Legacy. The word felt large and slightly uncomfortable, the way important words sometimes feel when they name something you've been doing without naming it yourself. He had never thought of his work as legacy building. He had thought of it as showing up, as paying attention, as doing the next right thing for the next specific person in front of him, one morning at a time, for 10 years. But Marcus was right about one thing. The 41 pages were only the beginning. What he had documented was a description of a system. What actually needed to exist was a way to teach people to build that system themselves, to see the invisible layer before it disappeared, to understand what they were inheriting before they changed it, to recognize the person who holds everything together before that person picks up their bag and walks out. He picked up his pen and opened his notebook to a blank page. He wrote one question at the top. What does it take to teach someone to see what they've been trained to overlook? He stared at that question for a long time. Then he started writing. He called Victoria the next morning at 8:15. She picked up before the second ring, which meant she had been waiting for it, which told him everything he needed to know about where her head had been for the past 24 hours. I'm coming back, he said, a breath on her end, brief but real. Thank you. Under the conditions we discussed, he said. All of them, non-negotiable, all of them, she confirmed. I had Gerald draft the authorization language yesterday. It's ready when you are. One more thing, Daniel said. Tell me. I want 30 days before I return to the division. Not to stall, to build the knowledge transfer curriculum. The 41 pages are a snapshot. What I want to create is a framework, something Evan can actually use, something Rachel can teach, something that doesn't disappear the next time there's a leadership transition. He paused. I want to make the invisible system visible permanently. Not just for this division, for anyone who leads people. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's a bigger project than coming back to run the division. Yes, Daniel said. That's why I want 30 days first. You have them, she said immediately. I also want Rachel involved from day one. She holds half of what I know, and she knows how to organize knowledge in a way I don't. If we're building this together, she needs to be a real partner in it, not a contributor. I'll call her this morning. I already did, Daniel said. She said yes. She wanted to hear it from you too. A pause. Of course. Another pause. Smaller, Daniel. For what it's worth, I've been sitting with that conversation since the moment you walked out of the room. The 41 pages. What you said about the invisible layer. She stopped. Started again. I've been running this company for 20 years. I thought I understood what good leadership looked like. I thought I was an expert at recognizing it. Her voice was quiet. I missed it in the person sitting 3 floors below me for a decade. You weren't looking for it, Daniel said, not unkindly. Accurately. You were looking at the results. Results are real. They're just not the whole picture. No, she said. They're not. A pause. You said something in that room that I keep coming back to. You said you didn't volunteer the information because you thought the results spoke loudly enough, that they were speaking a language that only made complete sense to you. She paused. I think about that a lot. About how many people I have in this company right now who are speaking that same language and assuming I can hear it. That's exactly the right question to be asking, Daniel said. I know, she said. I'm about 3 years late asking it. Better late, Daniel said, than never asking at all. He hung up and sat for a moment with the specific, quiet satisfaction of a conversation that honest conversations go when both people in them have decided to stop performing and start being actual with each other. It was rare. It mattered every time. Then he got up, made coffee, and went to knock on Lily's door. She was already awake. She was sitting at her desk with her laptop open, her school backpack half packed beside her, and the particular, focused energy of a kid who had gotten up early because she had something she wanted to think about before the day started. She looked up when he knocked. You called her, she said. How do you know that? Because you don't have that face when you're still deciding, she said. You have it after. He leaned against the doorframe. I'm going back, she nodded, not surprised. Because of Jordan and Maya? Partly, he said. Also because there's a bigger version of the work that I couldn't do from the outside. She looked at him. What does that mean? He thought about how to explain it to a 14-year-old, and then he thought, Lily is not a regular 14-year-old. She never has been. And the reason she isn't is because nobody in her life ever talked down to her about the things that mattered. You know how I wrote everything down? He said. The 41 pages about what I was doing. Yeah, that's just the description. What I want to build is the teaching. So that the next person who leads that team, and the person after that, and the one after that, actually understands the invisible layer before they start changing things. So they never have to learn it the way Evan learned it. He paused. So the Rachel Kims of the world don't have to spend 14 weeks holding knowledge together alone, because no one built a system to transfer it. Lily was quiet for a moment. You're going to teach people to see what you see. That's what I'm going to try to do. She looked at him with the direct, appraising look she'd had since she was 6, the one that felt like being read by someone who had decided a long time ago that the most interesting thing about a person was what they actually meant, not what they said. Good, she said. That's the right reason, he laughed. I needed your permission? No, she said. but it's still good to have it. He went back to the kitchen and drank his coffee. He thought about Marcus, about Victoria, about the crack in the table that had been replaced with a new table that looked identical but wasn't, because identical surfaces don't replace what's underneath them. You have to fix the foundation. Everything else is furniture. The 30 days moved fast because Daniel made them move fast. He and Rachel met every morning for 2 hours before their other work started. Rachel had her laptop, Daniel had his notebook. Between them, on the small round table in the coffee shop, 3 blocks from Everstone neutral ground, neither of their offices, a table where the conversation belonged to the work and not to any institutional hierarchy, they built something. They called it the People Architecture Guide, not a manual, not a handbook, a living document that described, in plain and specific language, how to understand a team as a human system before you try to manage it as an organizational one. How to identify the invisible infrastructure, the trust networks, the knowledge dependencies, the personality accommodations, the relationship histories that sits underneath every functional team and is almost never documented anywhere. It covered what to ask in your first week of leading a new team, not about processes or systems or performance metrics, about people. What does each person need from the person leading them? What has worked in the past and why? What has failed and why? Who holds the institutional knowledge that doesn't live in any file? Who has been here longest? And what do they know that nobody thought to write down? It covered how to read the signals that precede departures. Not resignation letters, those come at the end, when the decision is already irreversible. The earlier signals, the resume update, the private phone call near the stairwell, the job search tab that opens and then gets closed because the person hasn't fully decided yet. The quality shift in someone's work that only appears if you've been paying attention to what their best looks like. It covered the invisible work itself, the late-night call, the proactive conflict architecture, the credit placement in the right rooms, the creative protection, the individual accommodation that looks like favoritism from the outside and is actually precision from the inside. Every section was built from a real person, a real situation, a real intervention. Maya's window, Jordan's parking garage, Chris and Olivia's project structure, Rachel's institutional map, 12 people, 10 years, 41 pages, distilled into something teachable. In the third week, Evan asked if he could sit in. Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Daniel. "Pull up a chair," Daniel said. Evan sat down. He put his leather portfolio on the table and then after a moment pushed it aside. He pulled out a plain notebook instead. Daniel noticed. He didn't comment on it. Evan listened for the first hour without speaking. Then in the second hour, he asked a question. It was a good question, specific, operational, coming from a real situation he'd encountered in the past 14 weeks that he hadn't known how to handle correctly. When Maya closes down, he said, when she goes into that place where she's technically present but creatively shut off. How do you know she's there? What's the signal? Daniel looked at him. The desk, he said. She has a specific way of arranging her desk when she's in the zone. Coffee on the right, notebook closed, second monitor angled left. When she's not in the zone, the arrangement changes. It's small. You have to have seen both versions enough times to recognize the difference. Evan wrote that down, not in the leather portfolio. In the plain notebook. What else? Her response time on non-urgent messages, Daniel said. When she's fully working, she takes 2 to 4 hours to respond to anything that isn't flagged urgent. When she's blocked, she responds within 20 minutes, because she's not deep enough into anything to resist the interruption. Evan wrote that down too. You can't use these as surveillance, Rachel said. She said it directly, without apology. The moment any of this becomes monitoring, it stops working. This is contextual reading. It only functions if it comes from genuine attention, not observation with an agenda. Evan looked up. How do you hold that line? You ask yourself why you're looking, Daniel said. If the answer is to help, you're reading. If the answer is to evaluate, you're monitoring. The intention changes everything about what the person feels, even when the action looks identical from the outside. Evan sat with that. How do you train yourself to have the right intention? Daniel and Rachel looked at each other. It was the kind of question that revealed something about the person asking it specifically, that they understood the question existed, which was itself a form of progress. You care about the people before you care about the results, Daniel said. Genuinely, not as a strategy, the results follow from the care. If you're trying to reverse engineer the care to get the results, people will feel it. They always feel it. Evan nodded slowly. I walked in thinking the results were the point. They are the point, Daniel said. They're just not the starting point. Evan wrote that down. He underlined it. Daniel saw him do it. Good, he thought. That one needs to be underlined. The day Daniel officially returned to the division, he did not call a team meeting. He did not send a company-wide email. He did not make an announcement. He arrived at his old desk, which had been cleared and left empty for 14 weeks, a fact he found both practical and quietly significant. Put down his worn canvas bag, sat down, and started working. Jordan was the first one to walk past. He stopped, looked at Daniel sitting there. His eyes went through several things in rapid succession before landing on something that was equal parts relief and something too large to be named in the middle of a Tuesday morning in a workplace. Hey, Jordan said. Hey, Daniel said. How's the framework holding? Jordan blinked, laughed. A short, real laugh that released something he'd been holding for a long time. It held, he said, barely, but it held, I know, Daniel said. I saw the architecture you submitted last month. You added 3 load-bearing components I didn't design. They're better than what I would have done. Jordan stood completely still. You saw that? Rachel sent it to me, Daniel said. You've been growing into this work even when nobody was making it easy for you to grow. That matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, including yourself. Jordan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the ceiling briefly, which was what Jordan did when he was processing something too large for his face to hold without assistance from the universe above him. Okay, he said finally. Yeah, okay. He went back to his desk. Daniel heard him exhale from across the room. Long, slow, the exhale of a man setting down something he'd been carrying on his own. Maya appeared in the bullpen 20 minutes later. She saw Daniel. She stopped walking. She stood very still, the way she stood when she was taking something in, before she responded to it. Then she walked directly to his desk and sat down in the chair across from it, not asking permission, not announcing the visit, just sitting, because Maya had never wasted time on the furniture of social convention when the substance was available. Your window's protected, Daniel said before she could speak. Full creative self-reporting on deliverable milestones. No daily updates effective now. She looked at him. Evan already told me. I know. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. A pause. Why? Because Evan telling you is the policy. Me telling you is the promise. They're different things. Maya studied him. She had the look she always had when she was deciding whether something was true enough to trust. He had seen that look 100 times. He knew how to wait through it. The work suffered, she said finally. These past 14 weeks. Not catastrophically. But I knew it. I could feel the difference. I know, he said. I'm sorry it cost you that. You didn't make the decision. I know, he said. I'm still sorry it happened to you. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded the small, precise nod that was Maya's full version of an embrace and went back to her desk. 3 minutes later, Daniel heard something he hadn't heard from her workspace in 14 weeks. The particular quality of productive silence that has a different texture than empty silence. The focused kind, the making something kind. She was working. Really working. He looked at his screen and let himself feel, briefly and completely, the satisfaction of a thing restored. Not fixed. Restored. There was a difference. And the difference mattered. Chris stopped by at 11. He didn't sit down. He stood beside Daniel's desk with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who has been caught in the act of something he's slightly embarrassed about, but not embarrassed enough to deny. I heard you were back, he said. Good to see you, Chris. A pause. I may have sent an application to a competitor, Chris said. In a moment he paused. Poor judgment, I know, Daniel said. Did you withdraw it this morning? Okay, a pause. Are we going to talk about the Olivia situation? Yes, Daniel said, but not today. This week, you and I are going to sit down and rebuild the project architecture for the next quarter so that the two of you are operating in your respective zones of excellence without the collision points. The same way it worked before, he looked at Chris directly. You're too good at what you do for the past 14 weeks to define your next 10 years here. Chris looked at him for a moment. Something in his posture shifted a release of something that had been held tight for a long time. Yeah, he said. Okay, he went back to his desk. Daniel heard him 10 minutes later sending an email. The tone of the typing, fast, decisive, no long pauses, was the tone of someone who had made a decision and was moving on it. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. Olivia came to him before lunch, which surprised him slightly. Olivia was the kind of person who took time to decide when and how to approach things that mattered. The fact that she came before noon told him she'd already been deciding since she heard he was back. She sat down. She said, "I owe you something you don't," Daniel said. "I stayed," she said, "when I could have left. When the smart, practical move was probably to take the research position and go. I stayed because I believed the work here was worth staying for, even when it wasn't being managed well. And I want you to know that was a decision I made, not a default. I chose this place." She paused. "I want to know that the person leading this place chose it back." Daniel looked at her. "Olivia," he said, "I chose it back." She nodded, stood up. "Then we have work to do." She walked away. Daniel sat for a moment with the particular fullness of that exchange, its directness, its dignity, its complete absence of performance. Olivia had said the true thing and asked for the true thing in return and received it and moved on. No drama, no extended processing. Just two people who respected each other being honest and then getting back to work. He thought, this is what it looks like when people feel safe enough to be direct. This is what 10 years of building something made possible. He went back to his screen. At 2:30, Evan knocked on the open door of the office, the same office that had been Evan's for 14 weeks, and was now, by the terms of Daniel's return, back to being a shared leadership space with the round table moved to the center and two chairs on the same side of the desk. The way Daniel had always preferred. Evan sat down across from him. He had his plain notebook. He had stopped carrying the leather portfolio sometime in the last 2 weeks of the 30-day period. And Daniel had noticed that too without commenting on it. "The Meridian call is tomorrow," Evan said. "I've prepared the agenda. I want you to take the lead on the relationship repair piece, and I'll handle the technical update. But I want you to hear my approach to the technical section before the call so you can tell me what I'm missing." Daniel looked at him. 3 months ago, Evan Reynolds had walked into a room with absolute confidence and assumed the division was the beneficiary of his leadership. Today, he was sitting across from the man he had replaced, asking to be checked before a client call. "Walk me through it," Daniel said. Evan walked him through it. It was good, clean, well organized, technically sound, with the right emphasis on the forward plan, rather than a defensive explanation of the past misses. Daniel listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Evan finished, Daniel said one thing, "Tell me, at the end of the technical section, before you hand to me, acknowledge that the account management approach is changing. Not apologize for the misses. Acknowledge that the way we're managing client communication is evolving. It signals maturity without signaling weakness. And it tells the Meridian team that someone in the building is actually paying attention to what they communicated in that formal notice." Evan wrote it down. "Anything else?" "That's it. The rest is solid." Evan looked up. "You didn't have to come back," he said. Not as a compliment, as a fact he was sitting with. "You had Meridian, you had Marcus, you had a role built around exactly what you do. You didn't have to come back here." "No," Daniel said. "I didn't. Why did you?" Daniel looked at the plain notebook in Evan's hands, at the room that had been rearranged to put two chairs on the same side of the desk, at the bullpen outside the glass where Jordan was building architecture, and Maya was making something real, and Chris was sending decisive emails, and Olivia was already halfway through the next deliverable. "Because the work matters," he said, "and the people matter. And there was a version of this place that I knew was possible. That wasn't possible without me being here. Leaving felt accurate at the time. Coming back feels accurate now." He paused. "I follow what's accurate. That's the only navigation system I've ever trusted." Evan nodded. He was writing something in the notebook. Daniel didn't try to read it. Whatever it was Evan's to keep. "I'm going to get this wrong sometimes," Evan said. "I want you to tell me when I do. I will," Daniel said. "And you're going to see me get things wrong too. Tell me when that happens." Evan looked up. He hadn't expected that. "You get things wrong?" "All the time," Daniel said. "The difference is I've had 10 years of practice noticing it faster." He looked at Evan directly. "That's what I'm going to teach you. Not how to be perfect. How to notice. And then how to fix it before it breaks something you can't repair." Evan sat with that for a moment. Then he closed his notebook, stood up, and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. It was a different handshake than the first one in the small conference room, and different again from the one in the executive suite on day one. This one was the handshake of two people who had been through something real together and we're starting something new on the other side of it. That evening, Daniel picked up Lily from volleyball practice. She climbed into the passenger seat, with the particular exhaustion of a person who has worked hard at something physical and feels good about it. Yeah. The kind of tired that comes with satisfaction built in. She looked at him, read his face. "Good day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Good day." She nodded, looked out the window. "Did Maya work?" He laughed. "How do you know about Maya?" "You've talked about her for 4 years," Lily said simply. "Whether or not she's working is basically a barometer." He thought about the quality of the silence from Maya's desk at 2 in the afternoon. The making something kind. The kind that had been missing for 14 weeks and was back. "She worked," he said. Lily smiled. It was small and certain and complete. Good. They drove for a while in comfortable quiet. The city moved around them, ordinary and indifferent, and full of people doing the invisible things that kept their particular pieces of the world from falling apart. The nurse who noticed the thing the doctor missed. The teacher who stayed after class for the student who couldn't ask for help in front of the other kids. The person in the warehouse who knew which supplier to call at 7 in the morning when the regular channel failed. The invisible people, the necessary ones, Lily, Daniel said. "Yeah, what's going on with your friend group?" "The thing you mentioned a few weeks ago, someone feeling left out." She was quiet for a moment. "It's better," she said. "I talked to the people who needed to hear it, directly. It was uncomfortable, but it worked. You told them the true thing." "Yeah, and they heard it?" "One of them did right away. The other one took a few days." She paused, but they both came around. He nodded. "That's how it usually works." She turned to look at him. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. When you were at Everstone the first time, all 10 years, did you ever feel like it was worth it, even when they didn't see it?" He thought about the question seriously, the way she asked it seriously, because Lily's questions always deserved the real answer. "Yeah," he said, "because I wasn't doing it for them to see it. I was doing it because the people needed it, and I could do it, and that was enough reason." He paused. The not seeing was painful, but the work itself, the actual work of showing up for those 12 people every day, and making sure they had what they needed, that was never not worth it. She was quiet for a moment. "Even Jordan? Even when he called you at 11 at night?" "Especially Jordan," he said, "because Jordan needed somebody to answer at 11 at night. And I was the somebody. And 4 years later he built an architectural framework that was better than anything I designed. That's not a coincidence." She sat with that for a long time. "I want to do what you do," she said quietly, not as an ambition. As a recognition of something she'd already been doing her whole life, that she was only now finding language for. Daniel looked at the road. "You already do," he said. "You have since you were 6 years old." She was quiet. He could feel her in the passenger seat, turning that over, taking it in. The way she took in everything that mattered, completely, without rush, until it became part of what she knew. They pulled into the driveway. Neither of them moved immediately. The car sat there in the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday evening. And Daniel thought about 10 years and 14 weeks and 41 pages, and a crack in a glass table and a new table that couldn't replace the foundation, and a plain notebook with something underlined in it, and a quality of silence from across a bullpen that meant someone was making something real. He thought about the question he'd written at the top of a blank page 3 weeks ago. What does it take to teach someone to see what they've been trained to overlook? The answer, he understood now, was this: you show them. You show them with your own life, with the way you treat people and build things and tell the truth, and stay when staying is the accurate thing, and leave when leaving is. You show them by doing the invisible work without apology, and without the need for every person in the room to understand it while you're doing it. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if you've been paying attention to the right things, if you've given your effort to people who were worth it, you get to watch someone else start doing it too. He looked at his daughter. She looked back. "Tacos?" she said. He laughed. The same real laugh from the same real place it had always come from. Tacos. They went inside. The light was on in the kitchen. The water cycle poster was still taped to the cabinet door where neither of them had taken it down, because some things don't need to be removed just because they're old. Some things deserve to stay up precisely because of what they were, when they were made careful and complete, held together at the corners by someone who paid attention. Daniel Carter had walked out of a glass office on a Tuesday morning in March with 7 words and a worn canvas bag, and the complete, accurate knowledge of his own value. He had gone to a place that saw him. He had written the truth down. He had come back when coming back was the right thing, not because he was asked to, not because he needed the vindication, but because the work was real and the people were worth it, and the accurate thing was to return. And in a building 12 miles across the city, in a bullpen on the 11th floor, 12 people were working, actually working, the real kind, the kind that builds something that lasts, because one man had spent a decade paying attention to what everyone else had decided wasn't worth noticing. The greatest contributors are often the ones nobody sees. The person who prevents the problem before it forms. The person who answers at 11 at night. The person who makes success look effortless by absorbing invisibly and without complaint every piece of friction before it becomes failure. You don't discover their value by looking at a dashboard. You discover it when they're gone and the weight of everything they were carrying lands. All at once, on the people who never knew it was being held. Daniel Carter had put it down. He had let it land. He had waited for the right people to finally feel its weight. And then he picked it back up not because they asked him to, but because he chose to. On his terms, with his conditions, in his way. That is the difference between a man who has never known his own value and a man who has always known it. One waits to be recognized. The other simply does the work, knows what it costs, chooses who deserves it, and never, not once, confuses being unseen with being unimportant.